and welcome to the Global Agriculture Innovation Forum. I'm Gerald Shively, Associate Dean and Director of International Programs in the College of Agriculture at Purdue University, your host for this year-long series of events focusing on innovations to make small family farms more productive with the goal of feeding the world sustainably. On behalf of the organizing committee, our advisory board, and everyone working behind the scenes to make this forum possible, I'd like to welcome you. I'd also like to thank USDA, especially the Foreign Agricultural Service, for its ongoing support of forum events. If you're joining us for the first time, I'd like to direct your attention to the forum website, where an archive of previous presentations are available for viewing. Today's presentations focus on food and product processing for markets. To introduce the session and our presenters, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Dr. Beth Mitchum, who joins us from the University of California, Davis, where she is a professor of horticulture and director of the UC Davis Post-Harvest Technology Center. Please enjoy the program and please stay for the live question and answer period that will follow the presentations. Enjoy the program.
Good morning and welcome again. My name is Beth Mitchum and we're looking forward to this session on food processing for markets. As most of you likely know, there are a lot of people around the world who are in need of nutritious and safe foods. Micronutrient deficiencies, obesity, and stunting are at high levels across the globe and unfortunately are rising. Unsafe food leads to gastrointestinal issues that create additional challenges for obtaining the necessary nutrients for a healthy life. Unfortunately, most of our really nutritious foods are also perishable foods. Think about things like fish, seafood, meat, fruits and vegetables. These are all perishable foods, and some of them are seasonally produced, which means that there are lean times when production is not available. And in many parts of the world, there's a lack of infrastructure, especially cold storage facilities, to hold on to these harvested products to utilize them during the lean times. Processing, which we're going to hear about today, is one mechanism we can use to try to preserve that harvest, and hopefully without adding empty calories to the product. People, of course, also need income in order to secure the food that they and their families need. Poverty is very closely linked to hunger and malnutrition. And effective farming practices can help to provide farmers, small-scale farms, with income and also nutritious foods. The three speakers you're going to hear from today are going to touch on each of these topics, and they'll address some effective approaches to combat some of these challenges. So I'm going to turn to our first speaker in just a moment, but before I do, I want to remind you that as we go through the presentations, if you have questions for the speakers, I really encourage you to add those questions by clicking on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And there's going to be a lot of time at the end where we will be addressing those questions. So as they come up, please do put those in the Q&A. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, and that's Dr. Brietta Oakes. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Nutrition and Food Sciences at the University of Rhode Island. Dr. Oakes has more than 10 years of experience in international nutrition research focused on women at risk for micronutrient deficiencies. She's been involved in research projects in Ghana and Malawi, and recently led a nutrition research project among women shellfishers in Ghana. Her current research includes a research project in Ghana and in the Gambia to examine the nutritional impact of oysters in the diet of women shellfishers. So Dr. Oakes, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Today I'll be discussing some key innovations in shellfish harvesting that increase entrepreneurship for women. As many of you know, fishing is a livelihood primarily practiced by men. However, shellfish harvesting, which includes the collection of oysters, as seen in this image, as well as cockles and other mollusks, is a small-scale fishery practice almost exclusively by women. One of my colleagues, Dr. Brian Crawford, often calls it the invisible fishery. It is not monitored or regulated to the same level as many other fishing practices. This makes oyster estuaries and other shellfish harvesting sites vulnerable. In Ghana, coastal communities are growing in size, leading to more women participating in oyster harvesting. When an oyster estuary starts to be over-harvested, the oysters become harder to find and the size becomes smaller and smaller, which brings less money to the women. Without monitoring or regulation, no one really notices, except those doing the harvesting. And in the past, there's typically not been much recourse for these women to take, and no clear action plan in place when the community notices the over-harvesting. However, one emerging solution to this problem has been the creation of co-management plans. In 2012, the government of the Gambia granted the Tri-Oyster Women's Association exclusive user rights through a fishery co-management plan for the cockle and oyster grounds in the Tanbe wetlands. One of their first actions as a co-management team was to institute an 8-month closed season, which allows oysters to grow larger before being collected and prevents over-harvesting. This is an image of women from the association voting to maintain the closed season a year after trying it out. This association was the first women's group in Africa to be granted such rights by a national government. Since then, oyster harvesters in Ghana have followed a similar pathway and also instituted a closed season for one of their estuaries in 2017. These closed seasons are voted on and enforced by the community and have been incredibly successful, both in terms of women adhering to the community-led regulation and in reducing over-harvesting. By providing these women rights-based co-management of the harvesting areas, they have been able to identify and act on what will benefit their oyster harvesting livelihood the most. For example, mangroves, as seen here, are crucial for oyster survival and to the coastal ecosystem. The oysters grow on the roots of the mangroves and then can be picked off of the roots. However, some oyster harvesters might cut the roots of the mangroves to harvest the oysters quickly. This leads to mangrove degradation. The associations have been very proactive in restoring the mangroves, both by bringing awareness to the issue and participating in replanting activities, as they recognize that the mangroves are essential to ensuring shellfish harvesting stays a viable livelihood. Another focus area has been to improve facilities. Seen here is improved stoves for smoking seafood. This led to women smoking oysters in these new stoves and then packaging them for sale. In addition, improved clean shucking and processing facilities have proven to be beneficial for the women's shellfishing business. These can be small scale and relatively simple improvements. They're approximately the size of your average kitchen and have a roof overhead, cement flooring with good draining, and supply fresh water. They can be somewhat open air, but if so, best if screened to reduce flies. And then just include raised tables with tiles and sinks for washing and cleaning, which helps keeps oysters and other shellfish off the ground and away from animals walking over them like goats and chickens. These shucking and processing facilities can and should be integrated with sanitary facilities, such as including toilets and latrines with a water supply. Lastly, it's ideal if the improved facilities have a place for training, for social and economic development, where literacy and numeracy classes can be held for small groups of harvesters and processors. These facilities can also serve for other on-site trainings, such as business development, safe processing, handling and packaging, oyster ecology, leadership, and promotion of savings and loan groups. This is an image here of a training facility in Ghana. And just to drive home the range of benefits that can occur from having such a training facility, I'd like to share that I was able to conduct a nutrition research study among women shellfishers, which included blood work on site because such a facility existed and I had a place to set up the equipment. This study, which is examining the potential impact of eating oysters and how that may reduce anemia among women, will have many benefits. First, women in the study gained the benefit of being screened for anemia. Second, several women in the area were actually employed by this study and hired as data collectors. And third, this facility was rented by the study using my grant funding to conduct the activities, thus providing an additional revenue stream for the facility. Lastly, my hope is that this study and other such studies will bring attention to the nutritional benefit of oysters as an excellent source of iron and zinc and other nutrients, potentially reducing anemia, and thus will serve to promote the business of these women. To conclude, it's not about choosing between co-management or restoring mangroves or improving facilities. It's about recognizing that an integrated approach in all these areas would be the ideal way to empower women shellfish harvesters. Provide them with rights, lots of knowledge, skills and tools for sustained production, ecosystem health, human health, and social and business development, and they will thrive. I would just like to thank those that have supported my work in this area and the various people and organizations that helped make this presentation happen, particularly Brian Crawford and Karen Kent from the University of Rhode Island Coastal Resources Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oakes. That was a very interesting presentation. Now we're going to move on to our next presenter, and we're going to take our questions at the end. So just a quick reminder, if you have any questions related to Dr. Oakes' presentation, please put those in the Q&A now while you're thinking about them. And we're going to move on to our next speaker. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Jorge Cardona. He's an associate professor and also associate dean of student affairs at Zamorano University. Dr. Cardona teaches courses, coordinates research and extension related to fruits and vegetables, and manages the fruit and vegetable processing plant and the post-harvest plant at Zamorano. His research interests include application of industrial, chemical, microbiological, and analytical methodologies to fruits and vegetables, analysis of raw material composition, coffee and cacao processing, and new product development. I'll give the floor to you, Dr. Cardona.
Hello, and it is an honor to be part of this global forum in agriculture. Today, we will briefly talk about food processing in Central America, specifically with fruits and vegetables, and we will share some experiences along the way to improve the well-being of producers through practical innovation, which then translates to socio-economical development and sustainability. As we all know, food systems need continuous evolution to respond to the increasing world population, adapt to changes locally and internationally, being aware of the environment and understanding the intricate and delicate balance in all the value chain. In parallel, it is sad but important to mention food waste. Food losses account for $1 trillion annually due to waste creation of over 1 billion tons of organic matter from farm to table. This is particularly worrisome in fruits and vegetables, given it's the area where most waste is generated. In Latin America, most of these losses occur in the farms and during post-harvest practices. Thus, it is important to work with farmers and food producers to counter this issue. Although everybody must be engaged in reducing food waste from farmer to consumer, small developments in early stages of the value chain could help improve this situation, increase safety and quality of produce, and therefore increase earnings for farmers. Let's review then some interesting stories around this region of basic improvements that have impacted and will continue to impact fresh and processed fruits and vegetables, from production all the way to commercialization. A tomato project conducted with USAID promoted the change of wooden boxes to plastic containers. This had impact in food safety, as wood is an excellent environment for pathogen growth, limiting sanitation of boxes between batches. Additionally, this change promoted a different way to commercialize these produce. Farmers were paid by boxes instead of weight. You can see the picture where intermediate buyers, known as coyotes in our region, would pack the boxes with tomatoes, hurting them and starting a change of reactions of product waste, inoculation of the boxes, and compromising client safety with these potentially contaminated products. Proposed changes in commercialization could increase earnings up to 10% for farmers and limiting losses due to bruising and cross-contamination. During the same USAID project, we work with onion producers in Guatemala. You can see a picture of the ceiling of a farmer's house. It is a common practice to dry onions in this area of the ceiling. However, poor airflow and increased humidity due to climate change results in higher losses and thus lower prices of these onions. Not to mention the risk of onions falling on the families living in these households. We propose an alternative structure to dry onions outside of the houses with better ventilation, considering air current, sun exposure, while preventing pest attacks and dew. Here is another example of a bigger structure designed by a group of growers, which lacks considerations to assure proper onion drying. These proposed changes gave versatility to small farmers to dry their own production, increase quality and shelf life, allowing them to be organized and improve their marketing and pricing. Central America has a variety of fruits which have extraordinary nutritional properties. Thus, various examples are commercialized internationally. Additionally, its weather and proximity to North America present excellent opportunities for export. However, not all products could be exported, and innovation is needed locally to present more opportunities of consumption and shelf life extension. We have worked with various farmers' co-ops to find means to process various fruits from pineapples, strawberries, mango, jocote, cashew fruit, among many others. Although processing facilities are expensive to build, we have seen various efforts with international support to create basic processing plants for juice and paste extraction. We have also conducted extension and research in food dehydration, as observed in the video, assessing inexpensive techniques of osmotic dehydration, followed by drying, which creates affordable dehydrated fruit, high in nutrients, at low operational costs. We have assessed various solutes, osmotic times, and drying techniques, including sun drying, to give alternatives to farmers and producers. These basic techniques have been used by various small farmers, and we are currently finding strategic partners to conduct research in the impact of fruit fiber in the human gut microbiota and its impact in reducing malnutrition, which could be applied to the school lunch program in Honduras, in Central America, and healthy snacking overall. Another important crop, especially in colder climates, is lettuce. We have been working with small farmers to revise their good manufacturing practices to improve their sales in fresh lettuce and innovate in ready-to-eat products and minimally processed goods. This has allowed to double shelf life in certain products with safety assurance by using vapor scalding techniques and acid-based washing. Central America has produced about 500,000 tons of various types of lettuces in the last 3 years, and significant waste is created due to external leaves being in contact with soil and climate conditions. As mentioned before, over 1 billion tons of waste are generated annually. These byproducts could be used to create dry matter to be used in human and animal feed, and the innovation in biodegradable packaging. We have been working on alternatives for food product development, silverware, platters, and packaging to illustrate these efforts to farmers who could then create powder waste for further processing, increasing earnings of organic matter produced in their fields. Through our Center for Coffee Research and Education, we have conducted various efforts to improve quality during wet processing by modulating washing, fermentation, soaking, and drying of these products to increase cut quality, which then translates to better green coffee prices in international markets. To summarize my message, it is important to organize our farmers to provide constant technical assistance, stress the importance of food safety and quality, which then translate to better earnings after all. Farmers must continuously innovate in practices and products to satisfy a dynamic clientele. Finally, it is important to understand our impact in climate change to find ways to reduce waste and invest in sustainability. Thank you very much for your attention and for giving me the opportunity to share these experiences through this global forum. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have after we finish our initial panel with other colleagues presenting their work. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Cardona. That was very interesting. Again, if you have questions for Dr. Cardona, please put those in the Q&A. And we're going to move on now to our final speaker, and I'm happy to introduce Dr. Jim Simon. Dr. Simon is a distinguished professor of plant biology at Rutgers University. Dr. Simon serves as director of the Rutgers Center for Agricultural Food Ecosystems, New Jersey Institute of Food, Health, and Nutrition, and the Rutgers New Use Agriculture and Natural Plant Products program. He has extensive experience in global food systems and has worked in dozens of countries overseas where he uses a market-first, science-driven model to commercialize horticultural crops and botanicals from production through post-harvest. Dr. Simon has been involved in USAID-funded projects for over 20 years, largely in sub-Saharan Africa, and always with a participatory approach, focusing on training women and youth and in using horticulture and botanicals for income generation, jobs creation, and improved nutrition. Dr. Simon, the floor is yours.
Good day. My name is Jim Simon. I'm a professor at Rutgers University, the land-grant University of New Jersey. And today I have the honor and privilege to be talking about peri-urban horticultural development of vegetables from health and nutrition to income generation. Our approach with horticultural development of vegetables focuses on health and nutrition as well as income generation. We build upon the 4 A's, including access, affordability, availability, and adoption to horticultural crops. In this context, and for this talk, horticulture will include the conventional horticultural crops as well as those minor or orphan, or otherwise known as traditional or indigenous plants that are lesser grown and more thought of as weeds and or from the wild. In this case here, adoption also refers to increased consumption as well as increased production if you're a farmer. So our approach with horticultural introduction into peri-urban and strengthen that peri-urban value chain is focusing on these 4 pillars. And we do this by using what we feel is a very innovative paradigm, a market-first, science-driven, one that's based in community resilience, that has that framework of making sure it's based and engaged and led by those communities, those local champions. We call this a feeds model. And it's based also on being culturally, environmentally, and economically sustainable. Now, in this talk, I'll focus to some extent on African indigenous, otherwise known as African traditional vegetables, as a case study of the larger horticultural vegetables that we all enjoy and produce in all different areas. We focus on these more minor crops because they can increase income, they could diversify the diets, and they're packed with vitamins and minerals. Importantly, unlike some of the introduced European-oriented vegetables that have spread all over the tropical and developing world, these are plants that often are already adapted to environmental stresses from climate change and can provide that climate resiliency, which is why some might be even considered weeds, some invasive weeds and some non-invasive weeds, but they already are often collected in the wild and not yet grown because they're not considered as legitimate crops. So the economic opportunities make them as an aggregate group as important as our conventional horticulture crops. These non-domesticated crops can include many that we're familiar with. They have different names all over the world, but we'll use amaranth and moringa, nightshades, the edible nightshades, spider plants that provide solutions to current problems of malnourishment and coupled to these other factors. We'll talk about these other factors first. Important to the models that we use on a market-first strategy, or as an outcome of it, we first do and understand cultural and individual and community and regional preferences for what local foods they want. If by understanding what local foods that they want, we could develop production interventions and strategies that make those accessible and affordable and available for them to be consumed. When we ask those stakeholders and those community champions, what are the most important limitations or constraints? Because if they were really successful, we wouldn't be focusing a lot of our time on providing such assistance. They come back and they say to us time and time again, most all, as you can see here, producers want better access to management practices. How do you grow it? You can see on the bottom left, raised beds, trickle irrigation, seeds being directly dropped in. Different technologies are appropriate, affordable, and accessible to them. And they want to be able to level the playing field because they don't always have access to the same information that we might have in our own post-developed countries as well, and including pest management. Growers want access to better seeds and seed quality. They want the seeds to be authentic. They want it to be real. They want it to germinate. They want it to be what they would expect any other commercial seed to be. And often developing countries, those peri-urban and rural growers get poorer quality seeds that get shipped into the other country. Most all the growers realize that if they're going to grow horticultural crops, it's an intensive knowledge-based endeavor, unlike or in contrast to traditional commodity-based crops. It requires information, it requires technologies and knowledge, as I mentioned. Here are some slides showing that innovative technologies that could be affordable, easily to adapt, easy to train, and develop into new micro business could include, but not be limited to, a number of different ways in which water is then either collected and or moved from underground to above ground and then into the crops itself. Powering, it could be by the foot, the treadmill, but most people don't like that. Most use generators that always break, don't work, unaffordable. And so there's a large movement for the lower cost solar panels that could be used for a wide range of mechanization in farming, as shown in the upper right here. One of the focuses that we always work on is gravity-fed trickle irrigation system, because water is often, but not always, a very limited factor. And here, these types of innovations, they're not super fancy, but they help provide year-round supply of vegetables, and they provide an increase in the yields that the growers obtain per season and per crop. Ultimately, each of these crops, regardless of what they are, have to meet grower field performance for them to be acceptable. And to be successful, they have to be able to germinate, emerge, be able to be somewhat resilient to the insects and diseases. And ultimately, the growers have to feel comfortable with them in terms of their taste, the use, and the marketability of their ultimate yield. Once we do that, Depending on the peri-urban areas, we may need protected cultivations or communities that are set up just in order to develop seedlings for transplanting to other communities as grown here and then transported to communities down here. Where they might focus on a range of different crops depending on what the markets tell them is needed and when it's needed. Because the growers need to be trained and often trained for success if they're growing for markets based on what crop, how do you harvest it, how do you package it, how do you get to it, and where that market is. In the upper right, these are, and the lower left, these are leafy greens, and the lower right is African bird's eye chili pepper. Once crops are grown, then innovative technologies are really important to reduce post-harvest loss, extend shelf life, could include everything from cooling, as we could see here, to drying using a solar chimney dryer. This is a model that was developed by, a modified model that was developed at UC Davis, and a CoolBot here that was developed by an organic grower upstate New York in New Paltz, okay, that's now used in order to trick a air conditioner, a typical air conditioner, that's not getting that cold, so it stays cooler longer and reduces the temperature to the type of temperature that you need to 4 degrees for the storage of fruits and vegetables. One of the aspects that we're very excited about is something even lower tech and easy to afford, and we call this shade. It's using a term called ShadeBot. We're mimicking the name of a CoolBot to say ShadeBot in order to provide anything that provides shade above the produce. Whether in this case it's a hut over here, but all of us know growers will grow vegetables in the United States as well as all over the world, and they'll keep an umbrella, they'll keep themselves in shade, but the produce is baking, heating up under the sun, and that's leading to increased respiration, reducing in shelf life, and poor appearance under shorter period of time for the marketplace. So using terms like ShadeBot, these are innovative, they're not scientific terms, but they're educational terms to get people to be aware of making sure that they're very careful with the produce from the time of harvesting to using it in the shade, keeping it moist with mist and water, making sure the water is clean and good quality. And ultimately, as it gets to the market, with horticulture and with AIVs, there's issues of how people cook now. Living styles around the world, just like living styles in America and in Europe, in every country, vary in generation and decades, in different decades. So looking at methods of cooking and then asking, are they meeting current needs to increase consumption? We find that often new types of recipes and new types of cookbooks and approaches to how to prepare the food safely and tasty is needed in order to encourage consumption. And ultimately, this is what you want: increased production, right? And increased consumption, part of that adoption. And we find that the horticulture can really complement and provide additional vitamins and minerals to them. And with the knowledge of their medicinal and the health properties, it encourage their further consumption. And with a good recipe and with a good product, it's a good recipe for success. This is a picture of the Matenga Women's Marketing Association that's given mall space 1 day a week. So as we go from peri-urban farm to the marketplace, often the long-term holding of a cold storage facility is not always needed if the peri-urban is in close proximity to the market. So the use of leafy greens, traditional leafy greens, can be minimized by making sure that we harvest early in the morning, keeping it cool or keeping it in the shade, getting it to the market so that it has that appearance and visibility that you see as described here on the shelf, or is displayed here on the tabletop, or in the formal supermarket itself, where these are from peri-urban growers that are growing for the marketplace, with knowing that the supermarket is purchasing it prior to them ever seeding it. Or if fresh market is not an option, or there's too much product for the fresh market, then plans in advance of the production can be used and made. In this case, moringa, made into over 40 different products that you can see displayed, some of them displayed here on the table and sold on the marketplace here with nutritional labeling. That is, using these different innovative technologies, these paradigms, these market first, science-driven, community resilient paradigms, we find that we could really train communities. We could lead to increased income generation, real income generation. In one study alone, in just one of our projects from Kenya over time period, we found that the growers received over $1.5 million US in their pockets. That's pretty remarkable for a development program, but it's because we had the right growers and the right trainings and approached each of those limitations as those opportunities with them, so that ultimately the growers that are participating can really improve their livelihood in these peri-urban areas through production and increased consumption. This is just a film in the voice of the women in the Sangwe. This is in southern Zambia. And I will stop here and just thank the many different people that allow these projects to occur while I have the honor of just telling their stories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon. That was very interesting. So we've had 3 really interesting presentations that have touched on many of these topics about how to better grow and how to process and therefore maintain the access to these nutritious foods. So we're going to move in now to our Q&A session, and I would like to, again, let you know we'd love to include your questions in this discussion, so please go ahead and post those in the Q&A section. But I'll start off with a question for Dr. Oakes. Dr. Oakes, I was very interested in your discussion about self-regulation in the Gambia and in Ghana, and it seems like that's been very successful. How can this approach be scaled and implemented in other countries? And how is this applicable in other contexts, perhaps related to food safety protocols?
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. So I really think it comes down to the core concept of peer-to-peer learning. So the way it really took off in Ghana was a small team from Ghana took a regional tour and visited the Gambia and Senegal and learned the best practices and lessons learned from the women and their experiences there. The other things that also facilitate this developing in a new country or in a new topic like food safety, the women were also trained. So in Ghana, 150 oyster harvesters, the community members, were trained in oyster biology and ecology. So that really facilitates empowering the women to do this co-management. And then finally, it's important to say this was all done in close collaboration with the Fisheries Commission, other government actors, local authorities and stakeholders. So making sure that you're hearing as many voices as possible that would possibly be interested in this and gaining their support and collaboration. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that government engagement and the policy part there is really key. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's essential. You need that collaboration to, especially it's about giving these women the rights to manage this land, right? So you absolutely need government to be behind that sort of idea and interested in giving women that sort of empowerment.
So as just a quick follow-up to that, how do you, do you think that approach and that engagement with the government is something that could easily be transferred to other parts of the world, other countries? And if so, what are some of the first things that need to be put in place to achieve success?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yes, I do think it's something that can be transferred and should be transferred. And as we've seen, the Gambia was doing it successfully, and then and that led Ghana to have a model to do it. So I would, and again, that was about facilitating the women talking to each other, right? So a small team from Ghana actually traveled to the Gambia. So I think that's where it comes down to, is really like facilitating the communication between the people that are engaging in these practices and letting them communicate with each other about how to do it. Great.
Thank you. Okay, we'll come back to you in a moment. I'd like to address the next question to Dr. Cardona. I was very interested in your presentation at the point where you were talking about changing how the payment for product is made so that rather than paying on a per box level, the payment would be by weight, and the ability of that to reduce overpacking. I want to hear more about that, and whether does that tie into any sort of regulations that exist in Honduras or in the region in terms of how products have to be sold, and how much has this been implemented in commercial practice, or is it a work in progress?
Thank you, Dr. Mitchum, and thank you, everybody. And great question. Yes, this project started in Guatemala. They were packing those boxes for like 60 pounds instead of 50. So you can see a difference of 10 pounds per box sometimes. That creates a huge gap between of what the producers expect to get versus what they really get after they go to that intermediate buyer. This has been started in Guatemala already because we've proven the efficacy of plastic packaging. We've also proven, inoculating these products to show the governments how important it is to do food safety throughout these chains, especially in tomato, as we started this project. Therefore, they have already started to change the requirements for producers to use plastic to get to certain markets. Therefore, the whole chain is kind of I would not say forced, but, engaged or introduced into this new way of packaging. The size of the packages are very, very close to having those 50 pounds per box. Therefore, they're very consistent in the way they're packed. So it's easily transported, marketed, and vice versa. And having that by pound forces the producer to know exactly how much they're going to make based on their yields in the crops in the field, and the other producers to be limited not to take advantage of these small farmers that we have in the region. So I think that this has a lot to do with governments knowing and understanding the importance of how farmers can increase their yield, increase their earnings. Therefore, that translates to social economical development. And I know that we're now in early stages showing those results in Guatemala and trying to amplify them to El Salvador and Honduras as well, specifically knowing that they are commercializing between each country,
So how are you trying to educate the government agencies so that they understand the challenges and best management practices?
Great question. We've done a series of research in conjunction with some of these authorities through USAID projects to show, for example, how not only boxes are inoculated, but also tomatoes, showing then the mass production that could be lost because of salmonella contamination, for example. And then that translates to a huge gap in earnings for producers that then, of course, translates to the whole value chain. If you lose product at the early stages, you're gonna get the rest of the chain producing or having, economical development up to the supermarkets or finally the clients. We've seen problems where, like, if you lose a whole truck of tomatoes because of these malpractices, you're not going to get that to the last part of the consumer, increasing the prices for consumers, reducing the consumption of these healthy products when we're talking about fresh. Therefore, it creates like a snowball effect, if you know what I mean. So we're trying to show those economic impacts of not doing small stuff at early stages, such in this case as packaging, good manufacturing practices, good agricultural practices as well.
Great, thank you. All right, let me shift to Dr. Simon for the next question. So Jim, your presentation talked about the efforts that you're making to teach small scale farm managers how to grow these nutritious indigenous vegetables, developing better germplasm. And then you also moved into the post-harvest maintenance of those. I want to ask a question that deals a little bit more with the production part, at least initially. And that is, I know with peri-urban horticulture production, one of the big issues is water availability, but also the quality of the water, particularly the safety of the water. Do you know of any, can you speak to any emerging innovations related to testing the safety of that water, or also that innovations that would increase accessibility and affordability of that water for peri-urban farmers?
Beth, that's really good. And of course, you always ask really challenging questions.
Sorry, hard question for you.
The kind that nobody asks. But no, I welcome that because this is a big issue, particularly when we're doing the sack garden in Kibera in Kenya. The question is, no matter what the water is it safe? Not just the cleanliness, you can see through it basically, or the dirtiness of it, but is it filled with microbiological contamination? So the first recommendation that we do, and it's easy to make a recommendation than necessarily to always have an answer, is to test the water. Okay, first test the water. We're testing it not only just for clarity, but for microbiological contamination. There are a lot of low-cost ways to treat water. Some are differential effective. You could go online. You could use it. People use moringa extracts for fluctuating to clarify, to separate out some of the coarse dirt. There's ceramic filters and sawdust and clay and plastic buckets that you use to catch that and kind of at least separate it to get the cleanliness down. But that doesn't do anything about the microbes. You could use different bone char or charcoal types of filtrations. People have used different plant extracts and bamboo to kind of filter. But again, this is more toward fluctuations. But when you get to actually the cleanliness of it, you have to really move toward a type of either distillation or solar distillation or heating distillation or chlorination or boiling would be, of course, the cheapest without any kind of outside influence. There are theoretically in some engineering, some low-cost ways. When I go into the bush and I'm trying to make sure my own drinking water is okay, I'll use water purifiers and things like that. But as a large scale, those things could be quite costly. But using some polymer residue extracts as it filters through the water can often take away a lot of the microbes, but it has to be done with testing. Sometimes you could use actually these very inexpensive kits that come in little vials, and you actually keep some of the non-pathogenic equivalent of the pathogenic microbes that you're looking for, and then add your water in it to see whether or not those microbes can grow. And you can put coloring agents in it to see if the water looks safe. But those are really qualitative assessments rather than quantitative. So in a combination of using this qualitative assessments to get an idea of whether there's an issue, and then back it up by actually laboratory testing for microbes using the typical ones in which you played out and you have the cultures. Most countries will have, at least in the capital, some laboratories that focus on food safety. And they'll have hopefully more than one type of place where you could, in partnership, move. And so when we worked in the sack gardens, we reached out to those local places that were in Kenya, or if we do it in different countries, we reach out to those equivalents that are the microbiologists or the food safety folks. So there's really kind of a two-step approach to see, is there a really issue? And there's even more of an issue like with human excrement and other things with livestock and things where they want to be able to use the water, but do you use it on horticultural produce, or do you reuse those material even through compost and everything into more agronomic or field crops that often will be so indirectly related? And then there's the other issue about pesticide testing. Sometimes you get this, you're from California, we're finding in New Jersey, these old chemicals that we used decades ago are somehow showing up now in certain types of very fragile environments. Were unpredicted, and the last 2 or 3 people that own that land or use that land had no real necessarily indication of the prior pesticides. That's a different issue which we don't have an answer for, but we try to find what the land use is. We look at the water and the testing of it, and then we look at different management techniques to how it could be both clear and safe from microbes. But that's a major issue.
Yeah.
I gave
you. Sorry, go ahead.
You find this when you look at how some of the shrimp is raised in Southeast Asia. When you get to the restaurants, it's delicious. But then when you go out and see how some of the seafood is raised with the type of water that comes either directly in from the pesticide, from the irrigation, from the agriculture itself, and or from different pesticides that are used, or from different inputs that could be human and or animal excrement, then it's a little scary. When you get to the restaurant, you don't see it or feel it. But when you see how it's produced, so with the vegetables, it's a concern, and it needs to be done in a proper manner. And there may not always be an easy answer at certain peri-urban areas.
Great.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great discussion, and it's a tough question that I asked you. So
I welcome that. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the next 2 questions I have are going to be addressed to all 3 of you, and we'll just go in the order that you guys presented in terms of answering. So the first one is, so each of you, obviously, based on our topic today, talked a bit about processing of different types of products. So my question is, how does that processing affect the nutritional value of the food that's being produced? And of course, that may vary depending on what you're doing. And if it does have a negative impact, how does that compare to the increased potential for safety or for better access across the season, if you understand my point? So we'll start with Dr. Oakes. If you could just talk about how processing in the oyster area, does that impact the quality, the nutritional value that you can get from those oysters?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And I very much appreciate it coming from my background being in nutrition. So when I think about processing of oysters, it's been interesting learning about how they're processed in Ghana. One, the fact that they're usually eaten cooked rather than raw like we do in the US. But then also in my presentation, I highlighted that a new way of processing them is smoking them and having them be dried and packaged like that. And there was a question of whether that might, if they're being dried and packaged, do they have reduced nutritional value? I mean, there's over 20 micronutrients, vitamins, and minerals that you could look at and be like, which ones are being affected. The ones I care most about and I think are most important to women in Ghana are iron and zinc. And those are minerals versus vitamins. Vitamins are going to be more likely to be degraded during a process. These minerals, I've thought about it a lot. I don't think there's nowhere they would go during the process where a vitamin is going to break down. Iron is something you can find in the periodic table and still going to be there at the end of all the processing. So no, I don't think it affects the nutritional value on components that I think are important to focus on.
Excellent. Okay, very good. That's interesting. All right, Dr. Cardona.
Thanks for the question. And I agree with Dr. Oakes. Definitely, there's any processing will have a negative impact on nutrients, especially vitamins, as she mentioned. Vitamin C, folic acid are things that will be degraded over a processing period, regardless of the temperature time that you expose those fruits, in my case, too. But you have to think that process, if you find ways to mix, for example, a solute dehydration and temperature, you find ways to reduce that loss somehow. In my case, for the fruit project we were doing, we were considering fiber as the main nutrient we were expecting to have there. And luckily, these heat procedures will not affect that negatively. Therefore, we'll get these fibers for later on, reduction in malnutrition in kids, because we were trying to get more mango fiber into these healthy snackings. So again, it's a matter of either you lose half of your production because it just comes in 2 months, or you can dehydrate that and have it, being produced and shipped to different areas, either locally, regionally, or internationally, because you extend shelf life. So it's a question of either I lose it or I try to, have a lot of this product with low water activity to increase days, weeks, or months of shelf life to assure these other nutrients that are more stable get to these final clients, which is very, very important as well.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, if the alternative is to lose all the nutrients, at least you're retaining a fair number and you have some food available. All right, Dr. Simon, same question to you. I think you might be muted.
Thank you. I have it a little easier for this question, Beth, because I had two great speakers that already gave a lot of the answers that are right on target. I would add a couple of components. This is where identifying those genetic materials at across locations and environments would be that much richer in case these vitamins are lost. I agree with the mineral elements that they're going to be stable, but sometimes quick blanching and quick processing, as you alluded to, could minimize those types of degradation changes. even the solar panel that you all did at the University of Davis, we did vitamin studies relative to that. And when it's dried quickly and it's dried in the right framework, we see minimal losses. You do see some losses, of course. But I think I would argue, or not argue, I would suggest that increased consumption over a 12-month period of time, rather than only a seasonal time, and increased daily dietary consumption of horticulture crops will still allow a healthier diet, even if there is a little bit of loss of nutrients, rather than an intense consumption during a very short period where everybody's growing the same thing, eating everything at the same time, and everybody just lives with it, whatever losses. So I think you go for food safety, you go for identification when it's possible for those increased elevated vitamins and nutrients, and maybe those that also have the cofactors that increase the bioavailability of something, that these are ways in which you together form a strategy that you have both fresh and minimally processed that have a concern for retention of vitamins. But I would also suggest that if you take two communities and you put them back on back and you give them something that is completely packed with nutrients and everything, and or one that where the food doesn't taste as good and something else that tastes a little better, they're going to choose what tastes better. So our role needs to be increased consumption on a regular basis and use technologies to minimize those loss of vitamins and or mineral nutrients.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, I have another question that will be posed to all three of you. So processing, we've just discussed, is a great way to extend availability of nutritious foods, but also for fresh products, the cold chain is an important tool to maintain quality and safety and also to prevent losses from occurring quickly. So I'd like to hear from each of you about how cold chain is important to the work that you've been doing and what you're doing, if anything, to try to implement. How much is cold chain used, and then have you been active trying to increase the adoption of cold chain? So we'll start with Dr. Oakes again.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to have a short answer on this one because I've had limited interaction with the cold chain around oysters, but I do know it's an important focus in Ghana and the other countries in terms of food safety. And so that's part of the training of women that's done, is communicating the importance of the cold chain, what it looks like, why it's important. And so, and that's also, I think, a key component of when we think about innovations in shellfish harvesting, is focusing on facilities that promote and make it easy to adhere to a responsible cold chain. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Cardona?
And yes, cold chain is essential for fruits and vegetables when they're fresh. And however, it's costly and it depends on the size of producers. And we've seen some only when they're organizing co-ops. So I would go and say, if possible, cold chain would be great. There's various techniques, as mentioned, Dr. Simon, for example, as CoolBot, for example, and other issues where you can reduce a couple of degrees in the shelf life of these products and definitely will increase shelf life. But cold storage is expensive and we don't have electricity in all the regions where we have producers. Therefore, it's challenging. So we have to impact in good agricultural practices, reduce, increase shade in certain places, organize harvesting times. Therefore, they can be harvested really early in the morning or late at night in order to reduce temperature in any ways possible. And if feasible in groups and where electricity is available, you would definitely try to find cold storage to increase shelf life of fresh produce.
Okay, great, thank you. And Dr. Simon?
I have the benefit by coming after two really good speakers. So I like the way this is all set up.
We'll have to let you go first one of these times.
To me, the cold chain is really critical, Beth. Okay, it really is. However, having said that, we have to realize there's no one answer to all the kind of agricultural processes and communities to which you're trying to help. So in some cases, cold chain with a very small grower could be, as the prior speaker said, almost unaffordable in reality. People build cobots, and then they find that it's too expensive to maintain it, or there's arguments amongst the community of who has what shelf space, what space. So I think what you want to really do is have a cold chain, but develop it differently. So you have a series of different aggregation centers and collection centers and distributions that could all feed into large-scale distribution centers. So you really mimic what the very large horticulture producers are doing now, but you're trying to figure out economically, culturally, sustainability, management-wise, and inclusion of women and everybody else. How can that be done with a small set of growers? Transaction costs for very small growers, very rural growers, are really high, be it organic, be it using any kind of a power, inclusion of. And so the question is, how do we move that? So I think the cold chain, if we could focus on engineering technologies that could introduce the power in a reduced way and make it more affordable in terms of using solar or hydro or wind. And I realize each of those are easy to say, and it's not necessarily applicable for everyone, but incorporating that into the overall plan of looking at things, I think the cold chain can be incorporated much more fully as it needs to be, so that really we're extending the opportunities for these rural communities and really some really powerful growers, but smaller ones, to come together in order so they can compete on the market, because ultimately it's going to be based on price, product quality, delivery, and schedule. And I think when we're trying to help those that need help the most, it's very hard to work on scheduling to grow only what you can sell, or only what you could box up and transport. So this is also why in horticulture we have a large loss of product, not only because of the lack of actual conditions, but the lack of tying together to making growing for the market totally in sync with growing for the production. So they're aligned together, relating to flexibility and all these other things. Not everything can be exact, but there has to be this paradigm of tying and producing specific to the market in certain ways. So it's not only what the market wants, it's when they market, how it, and then you come back and ask what type of cold chain facilities we need. Clearly, the really large growers are using cold chain rather effectively. I'm sure they could do it more efficiently, they could do it cheaper, but the question that we have to ask is, how do we get additional growers and voices in rural communities and even peri-urban communities to be able to join in a way that makes it economically profitable and sustainable for them? So cold chain is critical, but in the absence of having cold chain really worked out, this is where we come up with these other strategies, almost stopgap measures, if you will, before large-scale transformative year-round production of horticulture. That's both government public policies, tax incentives to reduce imports from other countries versus local produced material. All those really can help benefit the development and the strengthening of the cold chain. And your work at UC Davis is beautiful on that kind of cold chain and the post-harvest work. But I think the key that's missing sometimes is, how do we translate these really cool technologies into large scale to make sure that they're economical and they're worthy of doing, that people can invest. And that then really involves the management, the development of collective cooperatives or associations, depending on what country, it'll be called a different name. But how can growers work together in an economically driven way, but that also allows everyone to get a fair share of what goes into what comes out? Now, maybe I've spoken too much on that. But I think it's not the cold chain only per se, but it's all the environmental envelope that will help strengthen it to make it really come to bear.
Absolutely. I think you've really hit the nail on the head on that one. I think where you cited and how you set up this system is almost as important as what technology you use. And I think that's something we need to work on in the coming future. But I think you made some good suggestions for how that might work. So I have a couple of very specific questions for Dr. Cardona, and then I'm going to come back to another question for all three of you. So Dr. Cardona, there's a question about how long you cure onions in your area of the world.
Well, thank you. And that would depend on the season, the type of onion, and even where you grow it at. We've been visiting so many growers in Guatemala, and I was surprised to see at different altitudes where they live. Therefore, natural wind will differ in them. So what you're trying to do is any type of reduction of humidity in those onions will increase their shelf life. Therefore, you have to find easy and cheap ways
to have, as I mentioned, a small structure where you reduce some of the humidity, therefore you increase shelf life, you get that products to where it should be at the exact time, therefore you actually get the better pricing in the supermarkets. So it really depends, and there's various factors, even the when you harvest, the type of onions that you may have, and what is the stage of these onions, and even what type of onions are required for the market. So there's so many details in that equation that it's very hard to give you an exact either time or humidity percentage.
How can the growers, is there a simple way that growers can tell if the onion has been cured enough and is safe to be stored?
Sure thing. It depends on the external parts of the onion, whether, to that if they crack a little bit, they're ready because they lost already some humidity because water is trying to get out. Therefore, those small cracks will let you know that the texture has changed enough. So you know that the onion is ready. So there's a lot of ways to look at the color, the texture, to let you know that the onion is ready for commercialization.
Great. And then another really important question that I've grappled with a bit, and that is, how do you address the returnability of using plastic crates in the example you showed with tomato?
Very interesting and hard question as well, because you're trying your best to recycle these boxes, and I've had that problem myself with the plants. And there's a black market for plastic containers all over the region, so it's really hard. But you have to find ways to have a great relationship with whomever is next to you in the value chain. Therefore, you create a method to either safeguard your product, find ways to try to be very specific on your boxes depending on the products you may have. Therefore, you reduce the risk of losing this product. But again, it's a very, very complicated issue. We've seen it all over, and you lose this product and you have to find ways to reduce that loss, or that, I don't know how to say, disappearance, I would say in English. I don't know how to put it in English right now, but it's something that we're tackling every day. And therefore, we're actually going a little farther in terms of how do we use other type of biopolymers to create this packaging that has less impact on the environment. But again, the key issue here is cost. How much does technology cost for small farmers? And that's the next step. Right now, we're very concerned on food safety and the ability for them to commercialize. But there's other questions that need to be answered, and answered very fast.
Yeah, in the United States and other, more developed countries, there are returnable systems that have been put into place, but I think it requires a lot of infrastructure, of course, and socially, the model might not work in other places. I mean, it depends, I guess, on the value of that crate to whoever might want to take it. Maybe if those crates had like a return value, like a soda bottle has a 10-cent return. If you bring it in, you get 10 cents. Maybe if there was some value to bringing it back to whoever had their hands on it, I don't know.
Yeah. But that needs a lot of logistics, not only from the producers, right, from everybody in the value chain, to make sure that process continues and at least benefits the small producer.
Right. Okay, so I have a question now I'd like to address to each of you. So you're each working in different areas, but I'd like to hear about what you've learned over your years of working, either with those specific activities or others, about what do you find is the best approach to convince farmers to invest in good handling practices or improved technologies that are going to maintain quality and safety? What is the best strategy to convince people to change their practices? And I guess since we keep going in one same order, I'll start with Dr. Simon on this one.
Of course, this is when I shouldn't have mentioned anything. I was very comfortable being third. Now I have to come first. Let me wear a couple different hats, Beth, because it's a really critical question. if I wear a hat of an economist, and of course I'm not, I'm a plant biologist, kind of making believe I understand some of the economic aspects of it. I would say the best way to prove to grow it may be of interest. Are they making money? No matter what technologies, you could ask about scale up. If scale up or anything we do is not necessarily making money, increasing risk, or something, there is barriers to do it, it often doesn't get done. So the question is what we're recommending, are the systems that we're talking to them about, does it allow them to focus and see that they could benefit from it from current change? Okay. Horticulture, like everything in agriculture, unfortunately, is somebody's success is often at the expense of somebody else that wasn't successful, right? Some area is limited in its production, so now you have opportunities to come in elsewhere, where there's oysters, where there's food processing, and there's a kind of a net market, and so there's these markets are volatile, and they're connected with each other directly, indirectly, in many different ways. What I've learned from the process is that the human component of all this, to me, it's really kind of, I feel honored and blessed to have all these different opportunities. It's really the human component and the champions that you find can help make things work. What do I mean by that? Whether it's a government policy, whether it's a community policy, it's selecting the right communities, because you could do the same research, assume development, work with one community, and you could predict that maybe you're going to have X effect. And you work with another community, which is champions, they're waking up really wanting it. You have to catch up to them, and you have a Y effect, meaning, so really the development and the success of almost all projects is so dependent on the human capacity, the local champions, if you will, of who are really helping as the drivers, where we see ourselves as that kind of intellectual, technological spark plug, right? Or helping mitigate risk in other ways, but it's the people driving it that really make it. And so in all the years that I've been there, I find that the greatest successes are with those people where there's good communication, with you trust, and who do it for a lot of different reasons, but in the end, it benefits themselves and the communities and the region in which they're working. That's really a good formula for success. You can't wake something up if it's not wanting to be woken up, right? It's either they're there or not. And so I guess in development, where you focus the time and effort is hoping that you work with leaders and shakers that then wake up and motivate everybody else. But it's economically driven. We've all been out there weeding. We've all been out there doing a lot. It sounds great, but in the end, it's like the treadle mills. How many hours do you want besides wanting to lose weight? Do you want to use a treadle mill to pump water for 7, unless you have extra people that really you don't see them as having any future? You're looking at other ways in which that human power, drive, and experience can be tapped. So I think to answer your question, one, it's really the champion concept that is really key to make things successful. In ensuring that there's good communication with the marketplace from day one to make sure that we're doing things in sync. In the States, how many people grow and then you get called as an extension specialist? We all do. I got 40 acres of this or 10 acres of that. The size varies, of course, but the concept of I'm growing and now I have to worry about marketing. But if you do things in sync, it doesn't always work easily. But thinking about these as where you're going, that's just good management practices, good handling practice. Horticulture in particular is so expensive to do if it's done right. And people can grow, but is the yield there to make it sustainable? What is that yield gap that we talk about all over the world, from the lack of input, lack of resources, lack of doing things? So those are some of the issues that I've learned. The other part that I've learned in all these years is to, even though I'm talking a lot now, is to really listen and guide our program by what we hear. You may not always agree. You may not always do with the advice that's coming in, because you might see something with a different lens, because this is where getting some of us from the outside, or anybody from the outside looking in, can help shake things up a little bit to do things different. Because the truth is, if everything was done the same way, we'd have the same issues we'd be having. So we need to have a positive disruptive that leads to innovation and change. Our first speaker talking about organizing the women. You could say, well, if it's up to them, but if they didn't do it already, it's the presence and coming together and letting the women maybe lead it. But so I'm a believer in positive, gentle, culturally appropriate disruption to have these innovations really come alive, because this is how we change things, move things a little bit forward. Now, I hope I'm answering your question, but maybe I've talked so much I forgot the question you were asking.
Yeah, we were talking about how to get people to adopt new practices or technologies. I think you've offered us a number of insights on that.
Let me add one component.
Farmers.
The other part is we always work in concert with our local colleagues. So with local universities, with local, whether it's not-for-profits or others, we set up demonstrations and we get the local champion farmers to be able to demonstrate a new variety or new technology so that they see it in their own language, in their own cultural milieu, if you will, and environment, to make sure they can be better adapted. So we try to get local testing to mitigate the risk before we would make a recommendation to go to any kind of a small scale commercial. That tie-in, I think, becomes quite critical.
Great. All right. Yeah, you offered a lot of suggestions there. All right. Dr. Cardona.
Thank you. I have to agree with all that has been said by Dr. Simon. And two words that I think are very important is engagement and empowerment. You have in Central America, for example, up to 50 million people in such a small geographical region with so many social cultural differences that what happens in Guatemala might not work in Honduras, for example, or even in one country, two regions that are high altitude, low altitude, different weathers. Therefore, sometimes what you may suggest might not work in every case. And it's important to get those champions, as mentioned, that will lead the way to show their peers, I live here, this is working for us, let's do it together. Because you cannot come from the outside and try to impose something that might not work for them specifically. Therefore, another important word is flexibility. Try to bring some ideas to the table, but make sure that those actors locally are actually seeing the impact, both more, earnings, less time, in the fields, more nutrition for the kids. There's different ways that they can see their improvements in their life, culturally, economically, that will make sure that they actually go with those improvements we're trying to make. And it's important to do it together. We're not going to go there and try to, impose something. It's got to be, you give something, we give something, we're going to learn together. And I'm sure you're going to see the benefits. And if they don't see the benefits, they're not going to change their behavior or their practices or whatever it's needed to be changed in this position. So engagement and empowerment are very important tools in this type of changes we're trying to promote for better well-being and, improvement of their lives and their households, communities, etc.
Very good. Thank you. All right, Dr. Oakes.
Great, thanks. Jorge and Jim have really hit home on the key things that I was listing down that I wanted to say as well. I mean, just when you said the question, it made me think that I don't necessarily want to convince the community to do what I think is best. I want to have it be question driven, find out what are their concerns, what are they trying to do, and then see if ideas that we have fit and meet their concerns. So getting to what Jim said about does it make money? So then if we do a closed season on oyster harvesting, that makes oyster harvesting a more sustainable practice and better, but it also makes them more money. They're selling bigger oysters then. And so then again, getting back to that peer-to-peer learning, them hearing from other women, hey, we did a closed season and now we're making more money because the oysters are bigger. That's a key component. And then again, also the empowerment, the giving the knowledge, the training, letting them know why does a closed season make a difference. That's all part of the facilitating the adoption of a new practice, not just telling them the new practice, but why it works.
Excellent. Yeah, I like your comments, and also others spoke to this, the locally led, that it should be based on local needs and local conditions. I actually have a follow-on question for you, Dr. Oakes. Actually, it's a bit different, but it relates to what you were just saying. I'm curious, how affordable are oysters for local people in these countries, or are they more of an export commodity? And how does there's always this sort of tension between wanting to have good income for the farmers, but also wanting the food to be affordable for people's nutrition. So how does that play out in these places?
Yeah, so I have to say, one of the reasons I got excited about oysters, I come strictly from an international nutrition background. We're constantly looking for new sources of iron because that leads to anemia, which is a key health condition that we're trying to resolve. Oysters are not only an excellent source of these nutrients, but super affordable. It's totally different than what we experience in the US, where we view oysters as this high luxury food. In Ghana, it's very much the opposite. The women shellfishers are definitely on the lower income spectrum, and they eat so many oysters when they're harvesting. It excites me so much. And then they're just selling it at affordable prices too. So I get very excited about the affordability of oysters in these countries, because I don't see that as a barrier to using oysters to solve the nutrition deficiencies we're trying to solve.
That's great. Very good. Good to hear that. Dr. Cardona, there's a question from the audience for you. Can you speak a little bit more about the role of other forms of processing for fruits and vegetables, like juicing, in addition to the drying that we already talked about?
Great question. Thank you. It's important to have a variety of processing techniques, of a diversity of products you can create. Therefore, you have that flexibility to respond to different situations. Juicing, pasteurization, of course, requires more investment initially. Therefore, we've had some experiences with mango, with pineapple, where there's co-ops that, when they organize, they have a certain amount of producers that have some international support, government support. They can create small-scale plants and invest in some of this technology infrastructure to assure proper handling of products. So therefore, juicing is excellent. You can do tubular pasteurization, or you can do some electric experiments with certain products. And therefore, it's very important. But this needs to be accompanied by other types of inexpensive procedures to make sure that you actually have everything. We had an example here with citrus in the north coast of Honduras, where they produce so much citrus that they can do not only juice, but vinegar, fresh fruit, among other things. So it's also important to know that the amount of volume you have to produce, what type of final products you will have to clientele both locally and internationally. Therefore, I would say diversity is very important, innovation constantly, because your client might change what they prefer in their either juice, marmalades, other types of chutneys and other things that you can create from fruits and vegetables. So you gotta be very, very flexible and very open to new things depending on the market you're trying to hit.
Great point. Great point. All right. So the last question will be to Dr. Simon, and we have about 4 minutes left for your answer. So I know you could talk about this for an hour, but I would like to hear about, from your study and your work, I know that you did, the growers that you helped to improve their production of these indigenous vegetables. What did they do with the income that they received? Do you have any information on that? And also, did they consume these products in the household as well? Was their household nutrition impacted by the production of these more nutritious vegetables?
Those are beautiful questions and always difficult to answer, and each project might give you a different answer. So let me first let you know what we found and what we are still working on. There's really two. We were tracking, as you know, Beth, 500 households in both Zambia and 500 households in Kenya, to see whether their exposure to traditional or indigenous vegetables on a year-round basis would increase their consumption. And it looks like it is, but that's still being analyzed, so I'll hold back on that. But separately, those producers that were growing those AIVs that would then go into the market to make it immerse the people that then in these peri-urban areas, it appears that the growers were consuming more of the vegetables. Of course, we hypothesize that the growers are going to grow more than they have if they're selling it or not selling it. The real question is, are the people that are not growing it but exposed to it and hearing about it, would they be consuming more? So that's an answer we still have not yet finished analyzing. But right now it looks promising and good. But we are we feel very comfortable and good that the producers appear to be consuming more of those crops that they're growing. And that maybe should not be a surprise to anyone because it's free, it's there, they have access to it. So that was one question, correct? Is there increased consumption by the farmers, small farmers? And the answer is yes. What are they cooking it differently, and how are they spending the money? Some of them are really cooking it differently. We've gone through a 2-year process of production, so they get a certificate. We've gone through cooking recipes, and sometimes they adjust it to make a difference. Sometimes they go to these, enjoy the social, and then they go back home and cook it the same way that they always cooked it. It's not always 100% one or the other. But they do seem to want to be using it in a different way to make the recipes more exciting rather than more monotonous. They do like to now put it in with some of the agronomic foods a little bit more, which is that biofortification. That could be in a processing aspect. When you think of it at home, you can really be cooking like that in it and with it. So that's looking good. How do they spend their money? So we've only looked at some of the different groups that we've done it. And they're not always investing back in agriculture as we had hoped or encouraged. We always hoped, ideally, it's easy for us, 3,000 miles away to say, oh, whatever money you make, keep a certain percentage so that you could increase your ag inputs the following year. And then with the money in the following ag inputs, that becomes more economically independent rather than having projects help self-start them. They could pay back certain types of technologies that they might have taken advanced loans for and things like that. But as it turns out, depending on the nature of the individual community, there's that survival instinct comes where they just need cash, and there's not a lot of, the beauty of horticulture is there's more cash coming into a family more than a couple times a year than compared to a cassava or a corn. So there's more dispensable cash that they could use, but student fees and clothing to get the kids back in school and just surviving and helping all the relatives seem to take over a large niche. So it's really difficult to see exactly where they spend their money. They're earning more, but the expenditures are still being analyzed, but it's not always going to where we might have predicted it. Sometimes it goes into very unpredictable, situations. So what we can do is follow what's coming in. What we have not been that strong in doing, and I think a lot of development programs don't do, is we look at cash income to a grower. We don't look at the ripple effect of how the incoming in cash helps a lot of other businesses within a smaller community. And this is something I think that we all, as people that are seeking to advance consumption and better practices and more food security, can think about, because as we develop those type of models, those are the models that we bring to a national government so that we can get better public policy by saying it's not just the farmer. You had mentioned the density of farmers in Latin America, right? It's not just those individual farmers growing it, but all those people in the community that are in touch, engaged, and then are contributing to those farmers' success, be it ag supplies, other things. And so we don't really do a very good job. We underestimate, I think, the strong economic development ramifications of what comes in the introduction of whether it's oysters or processed foods or fresh vegetables. So I just mentioned that. So there is increased income, but we don't necessarily see it as the saving it, except if it goes into a formal, sometimes it's an informal community because they don't want to pay money to get formally registered at a country, right? So it's an informal community that's using the money, and they'll set aside money to use as loans to a community or for a piece of equipment that more than one individual farmer needs. So those are issues that really need to be worked out. I hope I answered it within the form.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our time, so I want to start by thanking our 3 speakers for excellent presentations and also for answering the questions so eloquently. Dr. Oakes, Dr. Cardona, and Dr. Simon, thank you all 3 very much. I would very much like to thank the organizers, Purdue University and the sponsor USDA. And, through this session, we've heard a lot about how processing is one mechanism that can be used to extend the availability of nutritious foods, that while there might be some decrease in nutrients from the processing, the overall benefit of having less food waste and more seasonal or crop, annually having access to more nutritious foods makes these products very beneficial We heard a lot about how, having more of a locally led and empowered approach to these practices, sort of supporting the local growers and the industry to achieve the objectives that they have for themselves, working with champions who can try to show the way of what kind of practices work. I think came through really loud and clear in a lot of the conversation that we had. So obviously there's more work to do to make some of the technologies and processes more affordable for small farms. But I think by helping people learn how to approach agriculture with a business lens and look at the cost benefits of different practices, perhaps we will continue to make progress. Actually, I'm sure we will continue to make progress. So again, thank you all. Thank you for attending, those in the audience, and thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening.